Welcome to the Self-Help Workshop with your host, John Farr. Episode 35, The Joy of Music with Pat Mercuri. All right. Hello, self-helpers. We have a wonderful podcast for you today. I'm extremely excited to bring this guest on. Now, our guest's musical expertise includes the guitar, mandolin, and banjo, individual and classroom instruction in music, music ensemble coaching, and music arrangement. He has performed and traveled with the Philadelphia Orchestra since 1972, the Opera Company of Philadelphia, the New York City Ballet, and the Opera Festival of Philadelphia, and several others. He's also served as the principal guitarist for the Forest Theater in Philadelphia from 1976 to 1993, was a soloist with the Concerto Soloist Chamber of Orchestra and the Emerita Chamber Players, and performed and recorded with the Philly Pops under Peter Nero. He has recorded as a mandolin soloist with the Symphony Orchestra of America and has performed in Russia, Denmark, and England, as well as Lincoln Center with the New York Philharmonic and Stuttgart Ballet, among many others as well, including playing in China, Cuba, the Middle East, with a variety of classical musical groups. So let me welcome you to Patrick Mercuri. Pat, how are you? And welcome to the show.
Thank you, John. It's great to be here.
I think we could just keep going with everything you've done in music. And, I just really wanted to bring you on today. I can tell just from looking at you, you're doing well. You're enjoying things.
Yeah.
Now, real quick, just so we could set some context, how long have you been involved in music, if you had to put decades to it?
Well, let's see. It's coming up on 60 years. So it's 59 years, I'd say, because I started playing guitar in February of 62. I asked my dad for lessons. My dad was a professional guitarist and electronics technician, and I wanted to play something. And I thought, well, why don't I try guitar? So he said, sure, let's start you up. I started on a guitar my older sister had used for a little while, and found I couldn't put it down, and never stopped.
Okay, yeah, and your dad was a big influence on your life as a musician, correct?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It was, and the strange thing is, he was a very, very busy guy. So I don't have a lot of clear memories of him when I was little, because he was working in the electronics factory, playing gigs at night, teaching students. He was a very busy guy. Then a heart attack slowed him down a whole lot, and we saw a lot more of him, but he continued to be busy with everything, just not as busy. But our close relationship started when we started the lessons. And then later there was a jazz guitar ensemble he played in. He invited me to join that. I learned so much from that. He sent me, once he couldn't teach me any further. He was a self-taught player himself. He sent me to Philadelphia to study with the great Dennis Sandoli, who taught so many jazz guitarists, including Pat Martino, as well as other jazz musicians such as John Coltrane. So he basically paved the way. When I got interested in piano, he arranged for piano lessons, and then helped me to meet the people I needed to meet, helped me get experience performing, and continued to be a big support through the rest of his life.
It's excellent. Yeah, and I just know from, growing up in the same area that you grew up, that your dad was always kind of, I don't want to say revered, but just a very well thought of, maybe was revered because I was just a small child, but he was a revered, was it Dixieland jazz? He had like his own little, like his own like niche that he was really well thought of in.
But by the time you knew him, he was playing mostly Dixieland.
Yeah.
He had started out, as I said, self-taught in the 1930s, played with a small touring band before World War II, ended up by great luck and talent playing in an elite Army band at Fort Dix, New Jersey, through most of the war, which ended up being kind of like a musical college for him because all the other players in that group were well educated, and he made some lifelong friends and learned about the wider world of music, learned how to arrange, learned how to engrave music. And that gave him a great basis for continuing. He, after the war, had a brief career in New York, but then resettled in Central Jersey, where my mother was from. And that's how he eventually found his way into electronics, but while still playing and teaching. Now, he ended up teaching just about anybody who was serious about guitar in the northern Burlington County or Trenton, New Jersey area. Then when he became, then after he left the electronics industry, started his own business. And there he had, he was teaching lessons, repairing instruments, and playing gigs. By the 80s, the opportunity to play Dixieland came to him, and he loved playing that. And so he ended up playing in a band, then leading his own bands for a few years. Before that, he played a variety of music, mostly jazz oriented.
Now, tell me about Dennis Sandoli.
Sandoli.
I imagine that had to be rather intense at times. Studying with him.
It was. Sandoli was a guitarist. By the time I came to him, he was only a teacher. He had a pretty distinguished career as a performer in the 1930s, 40s, and into the 50s. He stopped performing in the 50s, resettled back in Philadelphia, and became a teacher, teaching not just guitar, but as I hinted earlier, he developed a whole method of teaching advanced jazz techniques to any instrument. But it was very rigorous, and he expected a lot from his students. And anyway, when I was in that guitar ensemble that I was mentioning before, Carmen Gasparo was kind of the hot soloist in that group. He was a terrific guitarist from Philadelphia, a very young man at the time. And he was studying with Dennis. And so he recommended to my dad that when Dad was looking for somebody to send me to next, to send me to Dennis. Well, it was very challenging, but I was able to handle it. Dad had prepared me well, and I was in the habit of reading every piece of music my dad had in the house. So my ability to read music at sight came quickly, and that's unusual for guitar. I'm probably the only guitarist in my generation that I know who didn't start playing guitar because he wanted to play rock and roll. I just wanted to play guitar.
Yeah.
And the opportunity was there. Well, when I went to Dennis, it was very structured. The first year and a half were concentrated mostly on increasing my guitar skills, taking things like giving me a short passage to play and then fingering it every possible place in every possible octave on the guitar, every possible finger combination. Extensive chord studies, extensive work in creating chord melodies. Then once I was ready for his outline, the outline was a 4-week pattern that had 3 portions to each week. And among those things were you had to start composing a little bit. He gave you a passage to work out that you had to work out everywhere on your instrument. If you were a guitarist, you worked at every possible fret. If you were a non-guitarist, you had to play it in every possible key. It also involved preparing a sight singing excerpt from a book that is music to be sung with solfege syllables. That was great preparation. So by the time I was ready to major in music a few years later in college, I was very well prepared in terms of my skill in music theory and ear training.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And how well has that served you through your career?
Very well, because it got me to the point where when I see a passage, now this is just from my past skill. When I see a passage, I understand what it should sound like, but I also at the same time understand exactly instantly all the places I could possibly finger that passage. So it becomes just a question of choices. Now that's so do I finger it in the low register? It'll get this sort of sound. Do I finger it in the middle register? It will sound differently, but it might be more convenient to play. Do I play it in another area of the guitar? Whatever adjustment needed to be made, I was very prepared because of the rigors of what he put me through. So the difficulty of understanding what to do just wasn't there. He really helped me to understand and to know my instrument very, very thoroughly.
And how long of a process was that? Was that 5 years with him? A year?
I studied with him, I think a total of 5 years.
5 years?
In fact, it even overlapped my first year of college, where I was majoring in classical guitar. By the beginning of my second year of college, I couldn't handle it all anymore. And it was too much to try to do his program, do college, majoring on the classical instrument. And still, I was teaching lessons and playing gigs on top of all that, commuting to school. So it got to be absurd, and I had to let it go. But it sure served its purpose. Yeah. I was really well prepared musically.
Yeah, I mean, because for the listeners that obviously don't know you, there's a term, in the guitar playing world that I I've heard and I use, the guitar player's guitar player, and I think of you as the guitar player's guitar player. That's the guy that just can just cover all the grounds, and you want to keep listening, and so.
Well, that's wonderful to hear. I have to confess that, as I pointed out, I didn't come from a rock and roll background.
Right.
So rock and roll is a second language to me, and but I got decent at soloing and very good at rhythm playing in rock and roll. And so for those years when I was playing in the theater, playing a variety of styles, or playing for bands that played for parties in a variety of styles, I was always able to do what was needed to be done. But my heart really has started out in jazz and added classical, and those are kind of the two big spheres that I've focused the most on.
Yeah.
But when I've taught lessons, I've always tried to help the student get from wherever they're starting from to whatever they're trying to get to, as best I can, and that's kind of irrespective of musical style.
Sure.
Focusing most on gaining skills.
Yeah. Well, let me clarify what I mean by the guitar player's guitar player. To me, that's really like, technique and understanding of the instrument and the sounds it's able to make. Sure. It's not just being this, natural virtuoso who can just do anything. It's the guy that understands the instrument, understands the essence of the instrument, and can make it, work in the different areas. Like you said, like rock and roll, you get thrown in rock and roll. All right, I'm not a rock and roll guy, but I know my instrument and I can catch what's going on, and you give me the charts and
I see what you mean. Yes.
Yeah. And yes. So,
and I should point out that one of the things in my playing that's helped me to be I think an effective teacher is that although I am a natural musician, I'm not so natural a guitar player. I did not have innately the same fast reflexes that my father had.
Okay.
He could play fast effortlessly.
Really?
And I could not play fast effortlessly.
Okay.
So I had to, the training with Dennis was very helpful. And then I still had to kind of reanalyze what I was doing in order to get past what my technical limitations, especially in picking, were. In order to pick faster, I needed to analyze what to do, and there wasn't really anything that I found in the literature that showed me what to do. So I had to take what I learned from various sources and create my own program for building up speed and playing with precision and with control beyond what seemed natural to me.
Yeah,
and as I practice now, that's what I continue to focus on.
Sure, and that's one thing, that when I studied with you, which was great, and I just some great memories and powerful lessons. I remember early on, because the guitar, you want, as an aspiring guitarist, you want to play fast, and I think that goes with any.
Oh, sure.
I think that goes with any instrument, right? You just want
Yes.
you want to own your instrument. If you play sax, you want to bust it out and play, vibrantly. And I remember you saying early on, you said, don't worry about that. Calm it down. Focus on the fundamentals, and that'll all come later. And I really remember that, and that really, it was kind of an aha moment, like, oh no, it's like fundamentals. And so let's talk a little bit about, learning. So you've taught for going on 60 years. You've a wide range of ages, right? You like from children early on, kindergarten age, right up to people that are retired and still want to learn. And so that was one of my big questions. Was, you hear a lot of people say, oh, I don't have any musical talent and it's too late for me to start. And so with your breadth of experience, what's your response to that?
Oh, I would never say that it's too late to start. I would not agree with that a bit, because any task can be broken into steps that lead from one to another. So if someone wanted to play an instrument but claimed that they didn't have talent, still something brought them to that instrument, and that would be a desire to play music, which springs from a love of music. And so you take that as your first building block, and then when they start the instrument, you just have them do the simplest things at first and move ahead step by step. Now, I come from a written tradition that's and so I will have the student usually read from the beginning. I've had very few students that I taught that didn't read music, because that's where my great strength is, and also what I can help students get better at. I also find it's very helpful to have something concrete in front of us to know that we're that we're working on. But even so, once a student is more advanced, if they don't have a development in their ability to hear something and then play the thing they've heard, then that becomes something that needs to be developed.
Okay. Yeah, and you touched on a few things, reading music. So there's a lot of people that play instruments, as you know, that like how your dad started out, or just self-taught.
Yes.
And a lot of musicians I played in bands with, even original bands, were self-taught. And so it's interesting.
And some of our musical heroes as well.
Absolutely. And so, so someone who was taught, I'll just share my experience. So someone who was taught, music, through you, and then and in college studying, to then work with someone who was self-taught, can't read, literally one note of music, and is brilliant. I was able to cross that barrier and kind of unlearn what I learned, because I've noticed with other players, like, well, no, you're in the KG, that your F should be an F sharp, and they're caught up in the theory, and I was just always able to just let go of that, and it served me well.
You need to be able to.
And so it's like as people, we build these little walls around ourselves. And even the self-taught players, they might say, "Oh, I don't need to learn music. I don't need to." And there's and that's okay. Maybe you don't. It's up to you. But I think there's like a little bit of fear and anxiety around that, right? And to a certain extent,
that can be the case. Now, for some students, or not even students, for some players, if they reach a point that satisfies them, then mission accomplished.
Sure.
As a teacher, you encounter students who've gotten to a point and want to move beyond it. And that's where somebody like me comes in and maybe analyzes. I can recall a student who came to me, and he was a working musician, a weekend warrior, but working musician. And I looked at his picking, and he said, I just can't play. I can't play the things I'm hearing, and I keep missing notes. And I looked at his playing, and his picking was wild. It was virtually uncontrolled. And so I began to work with him in trying to help him find a way to play with smaller movements that gave him more control. But because he was still a working musician, he couldn't stay with it because he needed to play the gigs, and he couldn't play the gigs by changing in the midst of them.
Yeah.
And that was kind of sad. I hope he was able to eventually work in some of the things that I showed him. But you can't help everyone, especially if they're not in a particular place in their life that has room for that.
So, I was talking to a friend of mine who's a very good musician, weekend warrior, self-taught. And I said, hey, I'm going to interview a fantastic musician this week. I said, do you have any? I said, he was my teacher, so I have a hard time coming up with these out of the box questions because I've learned through you. And so I was never that guitar player that was struggling to figure it out. And so, I was struggling to maybe, get the techniques and and have learning the guitar. The guitar is actually a rather awkward instrument to learn, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's fairly easy to play a little on it.
Yes.
And if you want to play things with complexity, it's very challenging. It's one of the few instruments where you have to use both sides of your body to make almost any note. So the synchronization between the two hands is essential.
Yeah.
And many instruments, synchronization on piano. Yes, you need to be able to synchronize the two hands, but you can play lots with just one hand at a time.
Yeah.
Now, piano has its own challenges.
Sure.
The independence of the two hands, but that's just an example of how. It has its own challenges. Besides the fact that with ordinarily 6 strings, there are many places where the same note can be found. But although that presents an opportunity, it's also a challenge to know your instrument that well and to work within the limitations of 6 strings.
Yeah.
And still make effective music.
Yeah. Now, it sure is worth it though if you put the time in, right? If you want to play, yeah, and that's the thing, and and so let's jump back to my friend's question, because his question was,
yes,
for someone who's a player, has a style, self-taught, and he wants to learn more of the theory and things like that. What's one way? What's a good way, or what's a suggestion of how to approach that?
Well, I try to start with what it is that they already know. I try to find out. Okay, now how big is your chord vocabulary? What is it that show me all the chords you know, or let me call out chords and you play me every way that you know to play a C chord. Then it might be, okay, now, do you know the names of the notes on the instrument? Because a lot of players who can play very effectively within limitations don't actually know what the notes are. I encounter this especially when I get called by, say, a high school jazz band director who has a band full of young men and women that have been playing their horns or piano or whatever since they were little and reading music all along, and then there's a guitar part to be played, and the guitarist frequently is someone who has learned from a different path, and they can't play what the music of the high school jazz band calls for. So I've had students who came to me who had lessons for years but didn't know really the names of the strings or the names of what note you get when you put your finger here. there's a certain there's good auditory literacy, so to speak, but not visual literacy for notation.
Yes.
So I try to just get a starting ground of, okay, if we don't know the names of this and that, let's establish that. Let's get a vocabulary going so that I can communicate with you the information that you're going to need in order to pull in what it is you're looking for. So I start with that, assessing where the student is at and trying to go step by step. And that's what teaching is, step by step.
Step by step.
Taking the information that they have, adding new information. Now, none of that takes them anywhere unless they apply it. And so the student who's not going to advance is the student who comes for a lesson. You give them stuff to work on. They come back. They haven't worked on it. That's not going to go anywhere. And we find that out pretty quickly. But the student who applies what the teacher offers and comes back with more questions, new skills and more questions, that's the way they're going to learn.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think my friend, he said that he has to go to his instrument to find the note, and then he kind of has to look up. Like, he has a hard time notating. He knows the notes on his instrument.
Sure. Yeah.
And so is it just staying with it, learning, taking courses?
It's its own separate skill.
Okay.
And if that player has a need to notate, to in one case maybe remember what he or she is trying to do, or to share with others what he or she is trying to do in a visual form, then it's going to be painstaking at first. And then the skill develops. I've been reading a lot lately, old articles interviewing some of the jazz guitarists that I've admired and studio guitarists that I've admired. And it surprised me how many of them started out as non-reading players, but then eventually read well enough to be TV network studio musicians or radio network studio musicians in the 30s or 40s or 50s by just working at it, learning on the job, and adding to their skills continually.
Yeah. And so you mentioned chords. And so one thing about the guitar that makes it, part of its, I think its attraction and its popularity and its continued growth is the fact that you can play chords. In some instruments, you can't you can play through a chord, but you can't actually play all three notes. Or 4 or 5 or 6 notes at the same time. And so, let's talk about chords a little bit and how your approach. The way you taught me was technique, obviously baby steps, but I just recall chords as being, if I had to pick one thing, that I learned how to play on the guitar from Pat Mercuri, I would say I learned how to play chords. And if it's the one thing that served me well in any group I've ever played at or in my own music, it was the chords.
Sure.
And so
sure.
It's music, right? The chords are, it's like the foundation that everything works off of, isn't it?
That's the way I think of it. Yes. Because any melody is going to contain notes that are found in chords, or notes that are related to those notes in the chords. And if a player has a very limited vocabulary of chords, then that limits greatly what they can do in their playing. Particularly when it comes to playing with others. Sure. If you're gonna play with others, you need to have enough vocabulary that you can play the music that they're playing, and so there's no substitute for getting together with others, whether it's just for fun or forming a group, because that's where you you become challenged to add to your skills to play music that you enjoy. And I do like to have students tell me what music they'd like to be able to do, because it gives us a goal. Okay, so you want to be able to play song X. Well, song X does contain this, and this that are not in your skill set, but let's add them in. Let's show you what you're going to need to get that group of chords happening. And you want to play that particular lead? Well, it does involve this particular technique that you haven't developed yet. Let's look at that. Let's figure out how you can get to the point where you can play that particular sound on the instrument.
Yeah, and one thing we haven't talked about yet, and is the listening. How important is listening? And so, I'm going to back up and just share my experience. When I studied with you, I had the opportunity to learn the guitar, and that's how I looked at it. I'm learning the guitar.
Yeah,
and I kind of knew early on that classical. I wasn't ready to go there. It was like a level.
Didn't pull you in.
It didn't pull me in. I love it. I adore it. And there's some classical things that I can play, and it's fine. And I do enjoy it. And jazz, while you taught me a lot of jazz things, and I can play some jazz, I never quite listened to jazz to the extent that I listened to, say, blues or rock and roll or some other things. And so I think if I look back at my playing, I think it's the listening to jazz that was my weak, because I don't think it was a matter of like I couldn't learn, because I knew how to get around the guitar. I knew the chords. And so just talk about how important is, if you want to study a certain genre, how important the listening is.
Well, the listening is essential. The thing that helps most players move ahead within a genre is to find some artist or material that really grabs them, that makes them say, oh, I want to be able to play that specific thing. So if a student doesn't listen to jazz at all, they won't discover whether it's something they like. They might listen to it a good deal and decide, well, that's not for me. That's not pulling me in. But it's helpful to listen to a variety of styles of jazz, just to sample them at least, and see if something really grabs you. And if something doesn't really grab you, it's probably not a genre you need to pursue.
Yeah.
But for me, I was kind of a music sponge, but I wasn't listening to rock and roll particularly. But I was listening to the records my father had. I was listening to the music on TV and radio. And then I started just figuring out how to play the things that intrigued me. When I was first playing, actually, I was already playing a couple of years when the Beatles hit.
Yeah.
And but Dad got me a Beatles book, and I started learning those, just chording to those songs. And didn't follow pop too much, but I got intrigued by different jazz things I heard, and started following that path. But there were specific artists and specific solos by specific artists that grabbed me and that I wanted to learn how to play. And so I started figuring out how to do those things, or looking for written versions, which there weren't many of. The same would be true of a student then. I find it most effective if the student has something that really intrigues them, specifically a particular song that intrigues them, that pulls them and makes them want to figure out how to play it, find out how to play it.
Yeah.
Having that gives you the goal.
Sure. For me, it was Hotel California. I heard that song.
There you go.
In seventh grade, I heard that song, and I said, I need to learn how to play guitar.
How about that?
When just from the beginning of the song into the guitar solos at the end, I said, I need to learn how to play. I need to learn how to play the guitar. I wasn't so, like I need to learn how to play this song. I was like, I need to learn how to play the guitar, and that's what got me on my journey. And so I want to switch gears, because it's such a treat to have you on. And
Sure.
let's talk classical, because
Mm-hmm.
classical, I love classical music. I do. And I love listening to Baroque, Baroque piano
Yeah.
music. And I
Mm-hmm.
love it. But let's go into Pat Mercuri, the player. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's get out of the teaching. Let's get into Pat Mercuri, the player. Let's get
Yeah.
Pat Mercuri, the player that's toured the world, who's on stage doing these classical pieces, and
Mm-hmm.
just share that experience, because that's all the technical. There's so classical to me, it's like technical, it's passion. There's like this love, and some of these pieces are very challenging, right? And it's like you almost have to reach
Yes.
in deeper. You almost have to reach to a deeper level of yourself to really manifest the beauty of the songs. Is that true? I mean, that's just my own take.
It is. Yeah, I agree with that. My own experience was that brought me into classical music was when I was in the middle of 7th grade. I was already playing for a few years, pretty serious player, and my parents got wind of the fact that a famous English player of the guitar and the lute, Julian Bream, was going to be appearing at Princeton University for a recital. And so they got tickets, and also our friend Carmen Gasparo that I mentioned earlier from the guitar group, who later recommended Dennis Sandoli to me, he went along too. And hearing that concert just changed my life, because there was a guy playing a guitar and playing all this complex, beautiful music, self-contained, first on the lute, the Renaissance lute, with 12 or 13 strings, and then takes an intermission, comes out with a classical guitar, playing with his fingers, and it was just stunning. So next thing you know, I'm trying to play with fingers on my Gibson jazz guitar, and the next Christmas, my parents got me a Guild Mark II classical guitar. And still, I didn't have a teacher on that instrument. My dad didn't really play the classical guitar, and I was already busy, playing the guitar, the plectrum guitar, pick guitar very seriously, and taking piano lessons. But I was teaching myself classical through the years. I asked Dennis Sandoli about it. He said, "Oh, get this particular book, work through that." Meanwhile, I'm just trying this piece, that piece, continuing to play it. Now, performing was never really a problem for me. I guess because my dad had me, I advanced so quickly. My dad had me play for anybody that came over the house. So when it came to performing, that was just not a problem. But I was interested not only in the classical music I was encountering on the classical guitar by exploring that, but also my piano lessons contained classical music. I started enjoying that. So I started listening to classical music, not just guitar classical music, but classical music on the radio. If there was classical music or jazz on TV, I'd seek it out. There'd be the Boston Pops concerts. There'd be the Andre Segovia Masterclass shows that used to run on national educational television before there was a PBS. Those were fascinating. I'd watch them again and again whenever they ran on a Philadelphia or New York station. So I didn't really get serious about playing the classical guitar until I began to major in it in college. Fortunately, I played well enough and had enough skill that I was able to be accepted to the Philadelphia Musical Academy to study with Bob DiNardo, who was a self-taught classical guitarist, but a very, very, very accomplished jazz guitarist. And he was the guitarist, in fact, who played for a nationally syndicated television show that originated in Philadelphia, the Mike Douglas TV show. It was a 5-day-a-week syndicated daytime version of the Tonight Show, you might say. And they had a 6 to 8 piece band, and Bob played in that band and taught himself classical guitar and was teaching classical guitar students and was teaching at Philadelphia Musical Academy. So Bob started putting me through the paces of, okay, you need to learn these studies, learn this piece, and so on. And so meanwhile, at school, I'm learning at college. Let me back up to say that in high school, I wanted to play in the school ensembles. So first I played guitar for the chorus. Then I went to summer music, learned how to play percussion, played percussion all through high school, where I learned how to follow a conductor, how to keep my place in an orchestra part or a band part, to jump around from percussion instrument to percussion instrument. I didn't have the good hands to play the snare drum parts, but I could play bass drum. And because I could play piano, I could play bells, chimes, timpani. I learned all those things. And that got me comfortable in classical music and comfortable in orchestral music. I get to college, I'm playing classical guitar and playing in recitals and just playing more and more complex music. But at the same time, at the school, my school at the time was very involved in newly written classical music of the 20th century. A lot of our teachers were active composers. One of our teachers led a new music ensemble. One day he caught me in the hallway, and I won't do his Greek accent, but he handed me a large score and said, "You will play mandolin for this." Well, I didn't play mandolin, but he said, "You will play mandolin for this." Obviously, he'd asked around, and he was told this is the guy to go to. So I said, okay. Borrowed a mandolin from a shop I was teaching in, figured out what I needed to figure out to play the instrument. It was it was musically complicated, but not complicated on the mandolin. Next thing I know, I'm performing this very new masterwork, Ancient Voices of Children by George Crumb, which had won the Pulitzer Prize in music, I think. Very difficult music, but that school helped me to become comfortable in playing complicated classical music, following a conductor, as I had done in high school. So fast forward another year, I got a call to play with the Philadelphia Orchestra. I'm just in the middle of my sophomore year, but they needed electric guitar for a piece. And so I had to go in, and I guess I had to audition for the personnel manager, and he was fine with how I played the part. But I saw at the top of the part, on the first page, a list of players that he had called first. He had first called a distinguished guitarist who was a distinguished guitar teacher in Philadelphia. He was no longer performing. Next, there was my teacher, Bob. Bob was not available because he was playing the TV show all day, every day. Next is a colleague of mine from school who was very talented, but didn't belong to the musicians union. So he was out. Next in line was me. I belonged to the musicians union, and so I ended up getting the job. And it was, I can't describe how exciting it was to sit in the middle of 100 musicians and play my part and have it all work. And so I was already in love with classical music. So it was exciting to do that, of course. I continued to play the mandolin a little bit because pieces would come up that needed a little bit of mandolin. Schoenberg's Serenade, Webern's 5 Pieces for Orchestra. Little bits of mandolin where the hard part was knowing when to play. The hard part was not playing the part. And so that led to my eventually playing the mandolin more seriously, playing for the opera company, playing regularly for the Philadelphia Orchestra as needed, starting several years later. In 1981, I started playing. First, they called me for banjo, then they called me for mandolin, then guitar. And I continued to play the classical guitar, but my activity on that instrument tapered off. There was less and less need for me to, less and less call for me to be performing that instrument. I wasn't going out giving recitals. I was playing mostly pick work. When it did come up, it didn't call for the high skills that I had had when I was in college. So I maintained a level of playing. So I continue to play it to a small degree at this point as needed, but I kind of let that instrument set aside. However, I've continued playing classical music, mostly on mandolin.
Okay.
And so that's, I've played for the Philadelphia Orchestra, New York Philharmonic, and pieces by Respighi. There are 3 major pieces by Mahler that call for mandolin. There's a Mozart opera that calls for mandolin. There's a Prokofiev ballet that calls for 2 mandolins at least. And so classical mandolin became where I took my classical music activity primarily. And again, I can't tell you how thrilling it is to sit in the middle of that many musicians and play your part. And normally when the mandolin is playing, it's a quiet portion. Mm-hmm. Maybe you're playing a little phrase with the oboe or something, or with the harp. But loving that music as I do, it's almost indescribable how much fun it is. And sometimes I've played the electric guitar, not only for Pop's concerts, but for the Leonard Bernstein's Mass from the early 70s. We recorded that several years ago. That came out on Deutsche Grammophon. So it's great how the two have come together. And lately, the orchestra has played a lot of film score music, where they'll strip the orchestra parts off of the film, and then you play them live to synced up with the film. And so we've played West Side Story a bunch of times, The Godfather, West Side Story primarily on jazz guitar, Godfather on mandolin.
Yeah.
That's it's been a combination of my different playing skills altogether. We've done movies like Up, Pixar.
Yeah, it was great
in concert.
Great soundtrack. Right? Yeah, to that one. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That whole opening sequence was amazing. For the
in which one?
Up. The whole.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Oh yes.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and we were. I played it 2 Augusts ago with Philadelphia up in Saratoga Springs, New York, and it was scheduled to be this past June, but of course with the pandemic shutdown, that concert didn't happen. I'm hoping that they will. It was going to happen in Philadelphia. I'm hoping that they'll reschedule it, because I'd love to play that score again.
Sure,
it's just so beautiful and written by a local product.
Yes,
Michael Giacchino grew up
Cherry Hill,
right near me. He grew up in Edgewater Park, New Jersey.
Edgewater Park. Okay, I thought it was. I knew he was New Jersey. I knew he was somewhere in that spot there.
The Burlington, Edgewater Park, Beverly area.
Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah. So, wow. I mean, that's a great share there. And so, now what's cool about your story, Pat, is that it's just a step-by-step process. You just kind of, your dad, and then another teacher, and then just, and letting like the love of guide you, and so tell me tell me about teaching, versus being a player. Did you have to make a choice of, like, at one point say, do I want to teach, or do I want to just be a player, or is it just smart as, like, just to support yourself as a person, to just kind of have that teaching gig,
right?
Versus the spotty play. I mean, obviously, the orchestras and stuff are highly regulated. They have schedules. It's not just hey, I got a weekend gig. So tell me about that as far as how it worked in your mind. As it all evolved.
The way it worked in my mind is this. I happened to start playing right at the beginning of what was the guitar boom, the boom in interest in guitar. And so when I was about 14, there were a couple of family members, my sister, my cousin, that wanted to try playing. And so my dad had me teach them. Before long, I started teaching students, other students at our home, and then got recruited to teach at other music stores. And at that point, it was just something you did because it's something I knew how to do, and people were eager for lessons. So I did it because it was there. Then when I started college, I had the option of either majoring in performance or in the case of my school, and there were very few schools that offered classical guitar at that point. It was a very new thing in conservatory study. Their other option was a double degree in performance and music education. And I opted for that because, as everyone said, well, you could always fall back on teaching, if things don't work out. So I figured, well, that's the smart thing to do. Meanwhile, I'm teaching lessons all the time. When it came time to student teach, I found that easy to do. It was easy to talk to students, to explain things. And somewhere along the way, I realized that I enjoyed explaining things, and I seemed to be good at explaining things and good at breaking things down for others to understand. And so I realized, oh, well, this is part of my vocation. Yes, okay. I'm a performer, but yes, I'm a teacher too, and always taught. And so by the time I was teaching you, I was also teaching at probably 7 different institutions around the Philadelphia area, various colleges where I would be teaching non-music majors lessons, eventually jazz guitar lessons to music majors at University of the Arts. And then finally, when I realized that after the recession in the early 90s, I was not earning enough money doing all those part-time jobs and playing the theater, but only, limited number of months a year. The Philadelphia Orchestra, yes, maybe a week every few months, but they don't need me that often. Well, I still had that music education degree, and I still had certification for Pennsylvania. I realized, okay, well, I should acquire certification for New Jersey. So I did the testing that was needed for that, and then started interviewing for jobs, and got passed over on a few, and it was probably wise on their part. I don't think I was ready. I don't think I was the right person for some of those jobs. Then, luckily, one day I had just booked another college. I won't say which one, but a college in the region that needed somebody to teach jazz guitar. So I had added that. I had also added teaching one night a week high school orchestra to a school district that had made that a nighttime activity. I had taken that job too. Then a buddy of mine, Dan Tobias, called and said, hey, you know what? We just had we got a sudden string opening here in Hamilton. And just thought you'd want to know. I said, yeah. So I set up an interview. I got hired quickly. I ended up having to quit almost all those part-time jobs, including the new college where I didn't even start. I had to be relieved from my contract. But I figured this is the right thing. It was teaching violin, viola, and cello, which I was not a performer of. But my training, music education training, includes that. You come out of college certified to teach instrumental or vocal, K through 12. Now, everyone ends up specializing. Very few people end up doing all of that. And very few people are qualified really to do all of that, but you're given minimal qualifications. Well, anyway, I had done a little teaching of young kids, and I thought, well, let's give this a try. I was happy to have the work, and I'd been working with violinists and violists and cellists forever, and had just spent a whole summer playing in Atlantic City with a combo at one of the casinos, led by a violinist, a very fine violinist, Artie Artemu, who had studied at Juilliard with Dorothy DeLay. So I was observing fantastic bow technique and tone and all those things through the summer.
That's amazing.
So I got the job. I started teaching violin to beginners and almost beginners. Started gaining gradually skill on all those three instruments I was playing. Just worked at that, learning it anew, because my training in college had been just enough to get you able to know what to do. But I got to the point where I could play anything that they needed to play. I could demonstrate anything they needed demonstrating. My piano skills were still there. I could accompany them. And I enjoyed working with young children. I didn't kind of expect that, but it worked out very well. I started out going between 7 different schools for one district, traveling around, being the string guy. Eventually that became 5 schools. And for most of my 25-year career, I was teaching at 5 schools, moving around, improvised spaces to teach in sometimes, but loving working with the students, loving getting them interested in playing an instrument. A couple of them are now professional performers, mostly not on the instrument I was teaching them, but stayed with music and are working musicians.
Fantastic.
But for those who weren't, I introduced them to a world of
Sure.
playing an instrument and hearing music beyond what they were used to.
Sure, and there's something about music. It's a language, and I mean they've done the studies.
Yes.
It activates certain regions in your brain.
Oh, it sure does.
Especially at young ages, it can really help you. Learn. It's another language. It's brain activation. It's healthy. It's healthy, and it's healthy to have an appreciation for music. And I mean, I think they've studied, advanced piano players and say that they're making their brains on par with like CEO level decision making abilities. It's just how it's how advanced that is. And so I'm of the opinion that there is no harm in learning a musical instrument. That you can only benefit from it.
Exactly. It's like you said, it wakes up certain aspects of the brain that maybe are untouched. And I didn't know that I was going to be a musician. I tried it, and it was the most fascinating thing for me. But I wasn't drawn strongly toward it. I gave it a try.
Yeah.
And just like my students will give it a try. In my particular district, what they did was for 3rd grade, you could play a string instrument. 4th grade, you could play a string instrument or a band instrument. So that gave us string teachers a whole lot of students that were 3rd graders. And it gave them an opportunity to just do something step by step, learn how to make some songs. And it was always thrilling when they would get to the point that they could play a recognizable song.
Yeah.
And then move on to the next one. It helped a lot to have clear goals. A colleague of mine brought in the idea that is originated elsewhere of having students earn karate belts for virtual karate belts for achieving certain songs, and that became eventually standard in our district.
Okay,
but it really was a motivator to get students to just go a little beyond what they could do. And for some, they finish that year and they move on to another instrument, or they don't play it anymore, but they gave it a try. For some, they continue and continue and continue. It all depends on the individual, but I'm so glad that I was able to get so many of them an opportunity to explore that part of themselves.
Sure. Yeah, and that's what music's been for me, just and it continues to be an exploration. And I was a benefit just from you and just in your background and everything, and actually you having that approach, because when I got in the guitar, I mean, obviously it was Hotel California that just inspired me, but it was kind of the Def Leppard and the Metallicas and heavy metal was kind of coming on, and and it was a guitar. The '60s brought out the guitar, folk guitar and rock guitar and Hendrix and kind of guitar everywhere, and then the '80s the guitars took different shapes, and Eddie Van Halen really took it to a whole nother level, starting in the 70s. And so that's what I had Van Halen books and stuff. And so you want to play guitar, you want to rock. And then I walked into this, I walked into your home, and we sat down and we learned to play the guitar. We didn't learn to play rock and roll. And
sure.
But back what back to what you said with Dennis Sandoli and your dad, like it served me to just go through that process. And then I found if I wanted to play rock and roll, I can play rock and roll. And and the more harder it was, the more I just had to work at it. And you know what? Played a gig in, I don't know, it was a country club gig or something, and I had this white Les Paul that someone had given me, and I put some hot rod pickups in it, and the thing really screamed. I ended up giving it away. It was just screamed too much. It was just way too loud.
Oh, okay.
We were doing Santana's Evil Ways, and I had learned that solo.
Oh yes.
And I played that solo with that gig, and it screamed. And we ended up playing the song twice. They said play it again, and I got to play the solo twice. We played it late in the night, and I just remember just like, wow, like I have the ability to teach myself some of these really amazing guitar parts. And it was very technical. Santana's very technical. Yeah. It sounds like he's holding one note forever, but it's very technical how he gets to that point.
Yes.
In my opinion. And, but that was like, 10 years later, wow, that's like the magic of that. I'm not gonna say it's your method, but just the method of, maybe it is your method,
and as a teacher, it's thrilling to hear, because really the goal should be to get the student to move ahead. But part of that moving ahead is getting to the point of being able to do what you were able to do. And that is to teach things to yourself. Yeah. To give you the tools to know enough to be able to find out things on your own.
Yeah. 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 That's the gift. That's the gift you've given me. And I greatly appreciate it. And
great to hear.
Yeah. And it serves me very well anytime I pick up the guitar and it's, and I'm very humble and I'll just say it straight up. Coming from a rock and roll space, it's a very vanilla guitar approach, it's very vanilla. It's like pure vanilla. Yes. And so I'd go and I'd be in these, even in college and out of college, and playing in these rock bands. I'm playing rock and roll with a tube amp that's clean. Yeah. And I'm thinking I'm just playing my vanilla stuff. People are like, "What are you doing? Like, how do you do that?" I'm like, "This is how I learned to play. This is how I learned to play guitar." It's like the guy learned how to make pizza from his grandmother. It's like the sauce. Like, this is how I make sauce. And it was years later I realized like what a gift learning an instrument versus learning. So I always tell people, if they ask, like, try to learn the instrument versus learning the song. And I think I think that's a big idea. This podcast is about big ideas. Don't you think that's a big idea? Learn the instrument versus learn the song.
Sure. You can't have too much information, and it's so valuable to gain that information, but also to gain the ability to discover new information for yourself. But it is important to do as you did, to seek a teacher so that you don't waste time reinventing the wheel. Yeah. And can move ahead to the things that you really need help with.
Sure. So
and again, the goal to get to play music that fascinates you and enriches you.
I'll tell you a quick story, then we'll get to the workshop piece here. Mm-hmm. So in college, I was not a music major, and I ended up getting a minor, or I started a minor. I don't think I didn't even complete it. Anyway, I wanted some guitar lessons, so
sure.
I got into that, and I had a really great teacher, and I wasn't learning classical. All the students were learning classical, and I said I don't want to study classical. I said I brought the book Guitar Lore that you and I were working with. And I brought it to him. I said, "Listen," I said, I would like you to continue to teach me out of this book." And he just said, he said, I can't do that. He was like, he's like, I can't do this. He's like, this isn't my thing. He was a great player. He was a great teacher. And we ended up,
yes.
We ended up just they were these really like just, it was just kind of like show up and we just like learn concepts and things and some jazz things and something. It was very open, and he he said that I was his favorite student to teach, and and he said that they tried to kick me out of the program because I wasn't a classical major.
Yeah,
and he said every semester he's like, I always had to fight for you.
Oh wow.
And he said, you know, every time he's like, sometimes you wouldn't even do the lesson I gave you. He said, but you'd show up the next week and you were better. And,
great.
And so we kind of had to learn how to work with each other. And he did teach me some interesting things. But I think that speaks to what you said, just when you want to learn and you have the tools to learn.
Yeah.
It was great to have that little bit of tension with a teacher too. And we kind of had to learn to work together. But he said that. I love that. He goes, you come here every week. He goes, you don't do what I practice, but somehow you're just better at the guitar. And so we found a way to kind of bring it together. And he was a great teacher too.
What? You know, I would say praise to him for seeing that you really had something there, and being willing to work with that and not shut you out.
Yeah.
But say, you know, this young man has a gift. Let's find out how to help him with it.
Yeah, he was a beautiful guy, and now he had the long hair, and he was more of like the guitar teacher, and he played gigs and stuff. He was a phenomenal classical guitar player. But he was a little more of the guitar player that, you know, when you first say I want to learn guitar, you know, he's, you know, like the long hair and out rocking, and that's
the guy to go to.
Not the guy that's teaching, you know, third graders violin, you know.
Right.
No offense. I love you to death, but you know, it's just it's these perceptions we make up, you know, and I think that the reality is just get in motion, right? And so let's get to the workshop piece today. We could talk all day guitar, and so I always like to have a call to action with these podcasts. And so we'll go a couple different. We'll do a couple different things. So if someone's wanting to learn an instrument, and say the guitar,
yes,
what would you say to them?
I'd say, the first thing, depending on their age, what about it? What about the guitar is it that fascinates you? Is there a particular kind of music that you want to be able to do, or is it just that you'd like to play an instrument and guitar seems kind of nice? It's any of those. Any answer is valid, but to try to focus on what is it that's pulling me to play the guitar is going to help you to find a direction for getting started. Now, today, lots of people get started by getting an instrument and learning from instruction that they find on YouTube. And that can be pretty valuable. There are things that maybe aren't so helpful because there's no one there sitting next to them saying, "Oh, wait a minute, you're doing something there that's an impediment to what you're trying to accomplish," and so it's valuable to try to find a teacher that can guide you, but not everybody has that option, and it's not always easy to find an appropriate teacher. But if they're a complete beginner, get an instrument, give it a try. That's what most people do, and then follow what it is that makes you want to play. And then look for the information that you need. The information that you need might be there online, or it might be somewhere in your town. The only way to know is to just give it a try and see where it leads you. But keep yourself open to the opportunities that are around. Some people have started playing from group lessons. And then gotten more serious about it. Others have started playing by finding an instrument that happened to be around the house and experimenting with it. Others do the conventional thing, like I did. Well, it's not conventional to have a musician in the house, but
Yeah.
but to look for lessons where you can find them. It still needs to be driven by whatever it is that is attracting you to the task that you want to approach. Whether it's music or anything.
Yeah.
What is it that's pulling me there, and then investigate, explore, look for opportunities to learn wherever those opportunities may be.
Excellent.
For me, it was, ask dad, listen to records, play my lesson that he assigns, but then explore that stack of music over there and try everything.
Yeah.
That's what was around for me, and then, but to generalize, opportunity, follow the opportunities and follow your passion.
Yeah, it's great. Great suggestions, great advice. And I'll add one thing about, when you said, the YouTube versus, and then maybe get a teacher. And I'll say one thing that stuck with me with you is that, I really wanted to learn, some rock and roll stuff. And there was one lesson I remember coming to there and I didn't practice that week. And you were like, yeah, well, we don't move on, until we get this done. And I went, oh, and so it was accountability. So it was that level, so that little bit of I think a teacher can maybe playing in groups too. There's that, that little bit level of accountability that sometimes you need to get over those little humps and stay committed to something.
I like that. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
That, as you say, it brings to mind, lots and lots of students who come to a lesson and they just haven't prepared. And, sometimes it's an opportunity to just teach them something else that they haven't learned. But ultimately, if they want to move ahead, they can't skip the thing that's keeping them from moving ahead.
Yeah. Well, you didn't let me skip ahead. And I thought so highly of you as a guitar player. And I was like, I wanted to, I used to tell my friends, I'm like, my guitar teacher could just play a C chord. It sounds like phenomenal. I'm like, I don't get it. And so but I have a beauty for the instrument. I love the music and its simplicity. And so, and that's what I tell people, just like try to play, for the beauty of it. Don't worry about the fast stuff. Don't worry about all this other stuff. But, for me, that I was like, okay, my teacher's not going to, this is important to him and he's going to hold me accountable. So that was a wonderful lesson for me at a young age to go through. Yeah. All right. So but one more question for the workshop. Sure. And so we talked about people that maybe want to get an instrument. So how about the people that have played, have gotten to a certain level, can play with other, maybe they're playing themselves and they can play songs. And the ones that maybe can play with in bands and they're playing rock, some jazz, just they're the intermediate maybe level. How do they get to the next level? In their busy lives and everything. What do you say to them? Like, what would be a suggestion?
It still comes down to, well, you do have to make sure that they can carve enough time out of their week to devote some regular study time. It might just be a half hour a day, but it needs to be frequent enough that a new skill can get repeated enough so that it becomes natural.
Yeah.
It's not enough to just gain a new insight, but not have an opportunity to apply it. So, a busy working professional or parent, they need to sort out things so that if it's guitar, they can probably play it quietly. They might have to play it at 11 at night for a half hour, which is not ideal for learning when you're very tired, or you might have to wake up real early or some such thing. But they need to have the opportunity to do the repetition that will build a concept into a skill. And there's no getting around that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then still, I feel it needs to be driven by the thing they want to get better at, identifying things they want to get better at and working at them step by step. Ideally, I feel with a teacher, or looking for maybe just listening to that record intensely and doing, as all of us players have done, stopping the tape or stopping the device to find out what that note is, and then what that next note is, and that's so valuable, because then you're not just you're training the ear, and by ear I mean the whole brain system, to focus intently and to gain the skill of identifying the sound you're hearing. I don't know if I ever had you do this, but one of the things I have students do sometimes is figure out how to play Happy Birthday, starting on any note, because everybody knows how Happy Birthday goes, and everybody who plays an instrument well should be able to play it. And if you can't, then that's a whole aspect of your relationship with music that's unexplored, undeveloped, but really essential. Because that leads to, in whatever style you're playing, the ability to have a musical thought and translate that into a sound that you produce. And so whether it's working with a teacher, figuring out how to play some figure or some solo, or whether it's sitting by yourself and figuring out how to play that thing, developing that whole auditory thing, it doesn't happen if you do it once a week. It happens if you do it daily or almost daily.
Yeah.
That's where the advancement comes in playing an instrument, certainly.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think you tie, I think we can tie this all together. So whether you're starting out or whether you're already on your music journey with an instrument, progression happens through new ideas and daily practice. If you want,
consistent application.
Consistent. I mean, Aristotle said it. Repetition creates a natural frequency, and repetition creates a natural tendency. I mean, you basically said the same thing. I mean, yeah.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's kind of what we're going for as with instruments, is we're trying to create natural tendencies. And the guitar is one of those instruments where, there's a lot of, muscle memory and application, and there's a technical aspect to it, not just the musical aspect to it, of like learning a Happy Birthday and stuff, which is a great skill to do, and play it in any key. So, okay. So any closing words, any, we're going to have to break this up into maybe 2 podcasts. But this has been wonderful. It's
good. Well, closing words would be that, for people who want to pursue music in some form, follow your passion, follow what it is that draws you to it, and then realize that you will need to work at it in order consistently in order to move ahead. Seek help wherever you can get that help, but keep your goal in mind.
Okay.
I want to play this. I want to play this song. I want to play this instrument. Keep that goal in mind. Yeah,
and you've seen through your career that works. That just you
absolutely
you will get ahead.
And in this past year, I've done very little performing. It's very unusual in my life to have done very little performing. I did some. But I've continued practicing, because not only do I need to maintain the skills, there's music I want to learn that I haven't learned how to play yet. And just like any other student, I've got to sit there and consistently do the work that that gets me the gratification of enjoying playing that music myself.
Yeah. All right. Well, you've heard it here. You've heard from a master today, self-helpers, that it's not too late to start, and that, focus on what's driving you to want to play music, and, use the resources around you to get better and add some consistency and just stay with it. A little bit of stick with itness is really all that's required. And
yes.
And don't be afraid to course correct when things aren't working.
So true.
So true. All right, Pat. Well, I got to say, this has been great connecting with you, and the stories have been amazing. And
thank you.
I think that there's some real fundamental pieces to your approach to music and how you teach and into the success of your students. And I know as a teacher, you don't always get to, see all those successes of everyone's of how, but you just know you've made I know for me, like what a profound impact you've had on my life. And I just, as a player and a person and someone who's even taught some people, the guitar. And so I want to thank you for joining us and joining me.
Oh, it's been my pleasure.
And I look forward to keeping in touch and seeing you around the block a little, as they say, right? So
absolutely.
All right. For the Self-Help Workshop, I'm John Farr, wishing you all the best. Take care.